All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Exceed. This is Gearface, perennial Exceed newbie. Very, very happy to not yet have alienated my good friend Andarel, who has, despite his better judgment, decided to hang out with me again to tell me about a new Exceed character. Today, we are talking about Millia. Andarel, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. And you say again, but this is probably gonna be the first one released, so really
Oh,
confusing
right.
the crowd here.
Yeah, I'm doing some fun temporal paradox stuff. We said goodbye to Rose before we said hello to Rose. Now this is going to keep happening. Stupid season 7 being released. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, Andrew. Really excited to learn a little bit about Millia.
Sure.
Um, quick disclaimers, as always, before we get started. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show, and that's not the only way you can play Exceed. You can play Exceed for fun. You should, in fact, play Exceed for fun. If what we're talking about doesn't sound fun to you, don't play that way. Play the way that is fun to you. You'll have more fun that way. Number two, we tend to be pretty prescriptive on this show about strategy. You're going to hear Andarel say things like, always do this, never do that. This is always the right play. This is never the right play. Exceed's not a solved game, especially with a character this new. Millia has only been in print for like a month or something now. So still plenty of room to develop this character, develop your own lines of play. Don't take out anything that we say as set in stone. We don't know everything. I don't know anything, frankly. Anderl knows a lot of things. But even his opinion is just an informed one. So please develop your own lines of play with this character and tell us what we got wrong. And finally, if you are brand new to Exceed, if this is your first your first season is Guilty Gear down here, first of all, welcome. Quick, just a couple of rules notes and bookkeeping notes. You might hear Anderel and I slip up and call these cards Slash and Dust, Assault and Spike. They're the exact same card. Just a cosmetic difference. Sometimes we slip up and you might not know what we're talking about. But yeah, all that said, Anderel, please tell me a little bit about Millia.
So actually, I think the most important thing to know about Millia is ties back to what you said earlier. She is a very flexible character, right? Like she's got good cards that just do good things
Okay.
with an economy that kind of relies on that. But because of that, she's very tactical. It's kind of hard to pin down specific lines. I know that some of the other players that I've talked to play her quite differently.
Mhm.
Rose and Chica both have very different styles of Millia, and like that's cool. She's a very flexible character, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Right.
So the main things that you need to know about Millia, her power is kind of low. She's got like a couple fives on the high ends and like a conditional seven, but it's mostly threes and fours and a two. She's pretty speedy, and she really wants to stun the opponent.
Okay.
So a lot of her game plan involves sort of like swatting down the opponent's strikes, whether it's on her defense or her offense, throwing mix-ups or using boosts to make her mix-ups less mix-uppy, less variable, and forcing them to make specific callouts,
Right.
and just generally whacking the opponent until they stop moving. She's not going to be trying to chunk you down in 3 hits. That's just not really a thing that she's great at.
Okay. So
Uh,
so I'm going to be doing kind of like a death of a thousand cuts thing with her, and I'm going to just be leveraging my speed and my mobility to throw good mix-ups.
that's a big part of it. She does, she has opportunities to hit hard, but they're a little bit situational. The other thing is that she's a character who tends to have very, very varying game states. She is one game you might have a ton of gauge, one game you might have a little bit of gauge, one game you might have, you might be stunning and getting a ton of cards consistently, and one game you might not be. So you're
Okay.
going to be looking at a lot of different situations with her that you kind
Okay.
of have to work around.
And that's not like sometimes that happens, like I'm playing a game with another character and the things that you describe happen because in some games I lose and some games I win. You're saying that Millia will have very variable games that it's not that, like sometimes like in the situation where she doesn't have a lot of gauge. That's not because she's losing. It's because she's spending it more flexibly, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's also that she has a UA that is specifically like her ability is a rich get richer. If you stun the opponent, you get a reward.
Okay,
So when you lose a strike, it hurts the normal amount, but when you win a strike, it tends to be a little better for you.
got it.
On your normals. So you can get into situations where like things are going really really well, or you can, especially if you're playing a more mix up heavy strategy, you can sort of lose a couple of strikes and then just really not have that much to work with.
Okay.
It's just part of how her character is built. And honestly, she's like that in the video game too.
Right, definitely. Yeah, she's a real vortex character, is my understanding.
Yeah, and she's like the second or third squishiest character in the game, so she
Right. So
can't really.
she just dies if she's not maintaining her offensive momentum.
Yeah. And so she's got a couple of like kid sub themes, which we'll talk about. But that's really sort of the gist of it. Is she doesn't necessarily want to be doing like constantly attacking you. You know, she has other things that she can do, but she always wants to be kind of setting the pace of the game and working around that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess we should talk about her ability. So her ability is very simple. It's if you stun the opponent, even if it's reactive, so if they grasp but you sweep them back and you still get the reward, you get to either draw, advance, or retreat. And advance and retreat is a little interesting, and we'll talk about that more as we talk about the cards. But draw one's like always good, right? If you
Yeah.
don't know what to do, just draw one. This is your main card draw, so appreciate it. It's really nice. Being able to strike without being
Please
being able to draw cards while striking is just really good.
Right. Right. So this is not a dodge, right? This is both, like, I've pulled out Chipp here. These are both after movement, but Millia only gets this when she's stunned her opponent. I'm not ever using my advance or retreat abilities to get out of the way of anything, because
Yeah, that's
not
just
how
not
it,
gonna
that's not how
happen.
it works. Okay. So it's not, I'm not using it to dodge, I'm using it to reposition for my next strike.
Exactly. And it's
Okay.
really good at that, but if you don't need to reposition, then you should just draw. And if you're
You
not
should just
sure,
draw
what
a
your
card.
hand's telling you to do, you should just draw.
Okay.
But advance 2 lets you kind of cross up, lets you maybe move to range 1 in a pinch and threaten a grasp or low kick, or like retreat 2 lets you dodge setups, for example. Like if you'll sometimes run into a situation where the opponent plays something because they know that even if you were going to beat it, like you're in an awkward situation, like if they throw a projectile with a handful of good close range cards, they might be like, oh, they're going to have to dive or assault.
Right.
And so you can sort of like hop in and then hop out to really work around things better.
Sure, that makes sense. And so I'm using this reactively based on what is in my hand and what I need in the moment. It seems like it would be very hard to corner her because of that. She can just kind of step out of the corner whenever she stuns the opponent.
So it is very hard to corner her, but that's not why.
Okay, fair enough.
It's because of one of her boosts.
Okay,
But yeah, so she's pretty good at like moving around the board if she does get stuns, because that like 2 free movement is just really nice to have, and it's not like it takes a turn. It's pretty much unreactable.
right,
But in general, yeah, she has pretty good board positioning and control, and her kit just lets her move around pretty freely.
right. So one thing that I'm not actually sure if many players uh, keep track of this, because for many characters, reactive stun never matters. You know, when you do sweep somebody's grasp
Right.
or something. Like, I've played a decent number of games of Exceed, and I could not tell you in a given game how many times I stun my opponent. So, like, how often? And understanding that this is obviously incredibly variable. If I just run my opponent over, stunning them every time, it's going to be that number of times. But like, how many times a game am I going to be able to get this ability, even just like ballpark?
Well, so if you think about her kit, right? If you need to hit the opponent, if you're doing 4 damage each strike, that means you have to hit the opponent 7 or 8 times
Right. So
to
like,
actually kill them.
maximum
And,
around 7 or 8 times is how many times I'm getting that ability.
and more likely it'll probably be 3 to 5, depending on how things are going and what type of kit the opponent has. But you should never rely on it. You might have games where it comes up twice, or you might have games where it comes up like 6 times.
Right. And in those games, odds are there's not that many more strikes in the game than that, because I've probably just won.
Or you hit them with 2 low kicks in a row and stunned them, and you did 4 damage and got your ability
True.
twice. And
True.
it's
I
like, okay,
see.
that's fine, I guess.
Right.
It's
Okay.
so it's nice to have. It's certainly a good ability, but it's not really her defining feature. Like her cards are much more important to her,
Okay,
I think,
so
than her
so
abilities.
this will be relevant frequently throughout the game, but it's not like Chipp for the guy I just pulled out, for example. It's not something that is like, foundational to his entire existence.
Yeah, and one thing that does come up a lot of the time though is if the opponent, for example, has their if you have like your assault down and they say try and grasp you away, or your slash down, I guess, if they try and grasp you away, and you just sweep back. Normally for most characters, you'd win the trade, you'd deal 6, they would deal 3, but now you're at range 3 and you have to like move in or play something.
Right.
Millia, and so you often can't like strike if you're not in a good position to swing back with a speed 5 or something.
Right.
Millia has that's not really a great strategy against her, and that comes up surprisingly often actually, because if you do that, you like sweep and then you move back to 1, or you jump back to occasionally 5 if you're threatening something.
You get the say. You get the final say on where you're going, and your opponent didn't. And if that's what they were playing the grasp for, that could be very powerful.
Yeah, it sort of hedges your bets in a number of situations, and synergizes well with a bunch of slows, with Iron Savior in particular, and with a couple of fasts that kind of bring you out of position where you might want to retreat again to threaten another fast card.
Okay, so there are some cards where I will be more likely to get this than others, just based on how they're shaped, and a lot of those cards are going to incentivize me to move in a direction. Or rather, they will deposition me or reposition me so that I may have to move in a direction in order to make use of what else is in my hand.
You just move around a lot, and it's sometimes intentional and sometimes not.
Right, makes sense. And then the card draw, you started out this portion by saying that like that's kind of just always good. So striking in Exceed, I understand, tends to be pretty resource negative. With Millia, is this card draw enough for it to like subsidize that resource cost, or is she not getting the ability that much that she can just maintain aggression like crazy?
Well, so that does suggest that you're striking a lot, because if your defense is lead striking, your resources are doing way better,
right?
Which is something that other Millia players, I think, are more willing to play defensively. I mean, I tend to initiate strikes, I think, more often than a lot of other play styles, which is fine. But if you are winning strikes and getting your draw, that will save you, a reasonable number of actions per game, maybe 2 or 3 off turns, which is pretty substantial, actually.
Sure. Yeah, that's quite a bit.
If you are not getting these, then you're more likely to have to prepare or to just like boost go. The one thing that's kind of nice is that she has a decent amount of advantage scattered around her kit. She's got it on Turbo Fall, she's got it on the Wingers, on Iron Savior and Wingers boosts. She's got it on Low Kick, and she also is a pretty good user of Slash. And so between all that, because remember, advantage at worst is always like gain advantage, then prepare.
Might as well. It's 2 cards minimum.
Yeah, it's 2 cards minimum, assuming that you are striking. If you're not striking, it's pointless typically, unless you like steal back advantage, which is not a thing you can rely on.
Sure.
So yeah, so it's kind of a mix. As I mentioned, she's very tactical, and you'll have to just adjust your game plan a bit on the fly to what you're drawing and what you need. But this is definitely, it will save you turns over the course of the game if you're getting it, and that's really what matters, because it lets you maintain your aggression a lot better.
Yep, makes sense. So by default, I should be going for the card draw unless I need to move somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yep, makes sense.
So her Exceed mode is a little weird, and a lot of Season 7 Guilty Gear Exceed modes tend to be small benefits, right? You spend 3 gauge for like a little bit that ends up being pretty substantial in terms of just math, right?
Like Eno's ability is literally like +1 power.
Yeah, which is, I mean, compared to older seasons, compared to Season 1 Exceed, that's not really doing all that much.
Right.
Millia's is kind of in a similar trend. Your Exceed gives you the exact same ability, but you can also choose to gain advantage. And as mentioned, gain advantage is better than draw 1 if you're striking, because you can always prepare.
Right.
But if you're not striking,
might as well draw 1 because you're getting advantage anyway because you're taking the next turn.
And you are spending 3 gauge and a turn to get this. Right. So I don't Exceed very much. I know some players do. The benefits of Exceed are really good. Yeah. And on a character like this, you are not spending your gauge on your ultras. That's only 2. So if you were getting that ability, especially if the opponent is stuck in a situation where they can't really react to anything, they have to like maybe on one size or your movement position and sense that you can just do what you need to do. The threat of vanishing things to death is pretty high.
Yeah.
So its usability in that sense, it will win games. It's just kind of expensive.
Right. Three gauged for the ability to gain advantage. Given what you were talking about earlier about how frequently you are getting this ability, it's a few times a game. That could be really relevant, but it might not be.
What's more appreciated is that gaining advantage from striking is way better than striking your opponent striking because they are below on one side and maybe while gaming or boost independent, they likely need to take time to establish tempo. If your opponent is someone like say Andarel, or someone who really wants to be striking their turn, for example, to get their ability and then their cards in different shapes. Those characters tend to get found very easily.
Sure. Yeah. They don't usually have guard on their attacks, or frequently they don't.
Or is situational and tend to be better in like side situation or just options and like places to tie actions.
Right.
So in that sense, you're really very, very, very impactful against characters. But I'm fighting into a slower character, like most characters want to guard across the board. I just don't think it's worth the gauge. You said that on probably instead.
Okay. So if I'm in a matchup, so either if I am detecting that my opponent is in a situation where they're gonna be vulnerable to a really serious advantage chain at some point in the game, go for this. Or if they are the kind of character who tends to get stunned a lot, maybe consider going for this.
Yeah, and of course, also it is 3 gauge, so it's nice to be able to threaten yours at least. So you kind of want to have a bunch of gauge already, which makes it a little bit awkward.
Right.
But at the same time, you might legitimately end up in situations where you just somehow end up with 5 gauge a couple of turns in because you struck with a bunch of things that do low damage and maybe they blocked or they played some slows and you traded a bunch and you're both at like 18, say.
Sure.
Then it's pretty reasonable consideration.
Right. Okay. So it might not be my first priority all the time, and it sounds like for you it isn't, but it is something to keep in mind as a line of play. And obviously for season 7 characters, the other big gauge sink that they have are cancelable boosts, of which he has quite a few.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your play style, in terms of what you're using your gauge for, is it more cancelable boosts to set up aggression, or are you going for some ultra payouts?
So I think I talked a little bit about this in a video that people probably haven't seen yet, which is the Jeanette video. But a lot of very aggressive characters will tend to like throwing a bunch of attacks and then do a big change cards to refill their hand if their card draw is limited. And so she is a character who I think really likes that because she tends to generate gauge with low power quick attacks that are sort of either evasive or hard to counterattack.
Right.
Which means that every time you hit with one of those, if you change cards, you're getting the card back, and you kind of do that all en masse. So I tend to change cards at least once a game with a pretty big change cards to refill my hand.
And some of that's coming from gauge, obviously, because you're at low hand size.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Then her ultras are pretty good, though they're a little situational, and the boosts are both excellent. Cancels are very, very important for her. You're going to want to be canceling a bunch. And those are the main sources. Like I would say cancels are probably the most important, then a big change cards, and then around that same priority is ultras.
Okay, and then so really your exceed mode is actually probably 4th on the list.
For me, yeah. I think for other players that's not the case. And that's something that, as a listener you'll want to experiment with, because when your exceed mode works, especially if they're stuck wild swinging or are relatively low on hand, maybe your hand you flip and your hand has some iron saviors and wingers and things that you can force them to discard cards. Right. You can just like delete them if they're stuck wild swinging into a exceed Millia. It is a very bad time.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, situational, but very, very strong when the situation is right. If your playstyle involves crafting that situation, you'll get more out of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. Cool. Do we want to get into the actual kit?
Yeah. So let's talk about. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about Bad Moon first, because that's probably her best card and one of her most important cards.
Okay.
So,
It's also got incredible art.
I mean, it's Bad Moon. It just
It's
looks
Bad
like that.
Moon. Yep. Iconic
Yeah.
attack.
Yep. I recommend that anyone who wants to be really sad all the time go and download the Millia mix-up blocker from Guilty Gear Accent Core, where it's just a reaction test to see if you can block Millia's mix-ups.
And
It's a fun little computer app.
spoiler warning, you cannot.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Bad Moon. It's her instant overhead for the video game. It deletes people. It's kind of a commitment in the video game, less so here.
Right.
So yeah, Bad Moon. It's above curve, right? It's speed 6 at range 3, which is already really good.
Yep.
It's ignores armor if you initiated. This is very silly. There's not a lot of ignore armor in Exceed, to be honest. You know, there's been some seasons have more and some have less, but it's always just a really good ability to have because especially if you can load it up with power, it tends to delete everything. There's a reason that Axe Kick is a notorious card.
Oh yeah. Yep. Shout
So
outs to Ken over here with Axe Kick. We'll demo that video eventually as well.
our favorite boost delivery mechanic.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yeah, so it's just like with Axe Kick. Bad Moon is an excellent boost delivery system. If you throw a thing on Bad Moon and then you play Bad Moon, you're probably delivering that card to the opponent's face.
Right. It's already above curve. It's already ignore armor. You're 2/3 of the way to what you want, and what you probably want on it is just more power.
Basically, yeah. There's a reason that Lust Shaker's on Bad Moon because that's your
Yeah.
power.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah,
And
Bad Moon
what
is
else you
it does a
got?
lot of things. You've
Okay.
got the power on Septum Bosses, you've got the power on Grasp, and you got the power on
On
Sweep.
badass.
Badass.
Right.
And those are all pretty good with Bad Moon, to be
Okay.
quite fair.
Yeah. Makes
So yeah,
sense.
Bad Moon. You can play it offensively as part of a setup. You can play it defensively to defuse or stun out a fast attack. Specifically things like in slash or like basically slash, where you're at that range 3, speed 5,
Yep.
which is a really important ban. There's a lot of cards that kind of checkmate in that situation, and Bad Moon beats most of them clean.
Sure.
Uh,
Even taking out the ignore armor stuff, like having a speed 3 attack that I'm sorry, a speed 6 attack at range 3 that moves you in is already dealing with uh you know 75% of the range 3 mix up.
yeah,
It's already dealing with spike, with slash, with dive. All it would lose to is sweep.
yeah, and focus on defense, like and
Right.
focus if it's not ignoring the armor, and even if it does ignore the armor, it trades
It's
evenly.
still
So
trading even, yeah.
but what's really important about Bad Moon that is surprisingly relevant is Bad Moon's got 4 power instead of 3. A lot of the sort of cards in its situation have 3 power, where you're
Right.
like 2 to 3, 3, 6, or 1 to 3, 3, 6. A lot of cards that are sort of a fast counter, if you think about it, like Hager's Atomic Collider, or Stroke the Big Tree, like cards that are
They all have 3 guard.
yeah, because they're trying to beat Cross and Grasp, and so Bad Moon will swat those down very effectively. It's
Right.
4 is just way better than 3 in this particular situation.
Right.
So yeah, this card is insane. You'll be playing it a lot whenever you're not boosting it, but it will probably never be spent for Force unless things go very badly.
Sure. And it's useful on offense, it's useful on defense, it's useful with boost, it's useful without boost. It's just a good card.
Yeah, it is also a very compelling reason if these are down to reshuffle early to try and get them back in because it is a incredibly good game closer.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Like
again, ignore above curve ignore armor. If the opponent has 4 or less life, probably means the game is already over. If you have a boost on top of it, that threshold just gets higher.
yeah, there's just not much you can do about this on defense if the 4 power kills you. You
Right.
can't cross out. You can't you can EX cross out, and she has ways of covering that pretty easily. She's got plus speed all over the place.
Right.
So yeah, this card is nuts. Play it, love it. The flip side, Lust Shaker is a very good boost. So Lust
Right.
Shaker is it draws you 1, so it's a little easier to play, and then it swings in for a bunch of power. This is your only real plus power, like you've got 1 on Writhe and Pain and a couple of 1s on the normal boosts. But if you want to hit really hard, Lust Shaker is the place to be.
And it's
And
cancelable.
it is cancelable. You will probably never, or not never, but you will probably be canceling it whenever you play it because you
Right.
want to play it with something else.
Right.
What's interesting about Lust Shaker is that because of the way her ability works, she gets a lot of benefit from big plus power because it's usually going to stun.
Sure.
If you're throwing it onto a 4-power attack, which is kind of where you tend to be a lot of the time with this, if you're throwing it onto a 3-power attack, like or less, like for example, low kick or on swing braid, though throwing it on swing braid is it's fine if you're not playing it as mix up.
Right.
That means you're going to max out at 6 if because it's 3+3. If
Right.
you're throwing it onto Grasp or Cross, same thing. You're going to max out at 3, or max out at 6 rather. But the real benefit starts coming when you hit 7 or 8 power with it, right?
Sure.
Because that starts crushing absolutely everything.
Dealing
There's
with
just
sweep
not
and
a lot
focus.
of
Right.
yeah. There's just not a lot of cards that have more than 6 guard.
Right.
Focus is that, and you can still beat focus, so it's a little harder. What that means is that you're probably gonna get a little bit of a refund, right? As long as you hit, you get your ability, you get the draw 1 or advance 2 or retreat 2.
Right.
And so
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, finish your thought. I'll cut in after.
Yeah, I was saying, and Lust Shaker pushes a bunch, which means that like there are decent odds. So a card with Lust Shaker on it is not going to lose to a lot. Like it's going to lose to maybe focus.
Right.
But as long as you're hitting them, between the having a lot of power and also having a lot of push, it's very strong in terms of evading counterattacks.
Sure. I mean, I could if I'm worried about stunning sweep to get my ability or to dodge it. Awesome. I'll put it on slash and I'll pump it up to 7 power, or uh I'll put it on low kick and then just push 3, and I've still dodged sweep sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's good. It's a very, very good boost. It does drain a bunch of force, right? Because you're spending this card, you're drawing 1, you're paying 3 more force, and then you're probably canceling it.
Right.
So it's a decent sized resource commitment. But what's interesting is that first, you don't have to spend the force unless you hit,
Sure.
because it's a hit effect.
Yep.
So
It's kind of a Rekka. You can see after you get to see this is all information that you're acting on after the strike has started resolving.
yeah, and what's really important is that if I, for example, throw Lust Shaker onto a card like Iron Savior, which is a common card to throw Lust Shaker onto, which has 5 power, if they are just going to get stunned, maybe I'll throw 2 force at it because that
Sure.
might be the useful exchange rate. Maybe I have an Ultra in hand that I want to toss, and
Sure.
honestly, Ultras, if I have them in hand and I'm not boosting them, and I'm not sure if I'll play them, if I hit with Lust Shaker, I'll probably toss that Ultra for 2 power.
Right.
It's a good exchange rate.
Sure. And so in the use case that you're describing, you hit with Iron Savior and they played focus. You're like, okay, spending 3. But if they played sweep, or if they played anything with less than 5 guard, like a dust or something that you somehow you need to stun for your ability, you're like, cool, I will spend up to the guard breakpoint, not as much as I need to.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on my hand also. If I have a lot of cards in hand, then I'm a little more willing.
Sure.
One other really important consideration is if it'll bring them to a reasonable life total. Like, for example, if it'll send them down to 7 or to 4, I will happily pay the extra to bring them to 4 life, or Bad Moon just threatens to kill.
Right.
7 is because it's 4+3, and it's pretty
Yep.
easy to hit for 3.
Hit for
So,
3, sure.
working around that Bad Moon math is also pretty nice, even though you did just spend a Bad Moon.
Right.
If you have 2 Bad Moons and you put Lust Shaker on one and then just strike, you can kill people from 7 pretty easily, which is
Definitely.
nice.
Yeah, and honestly, that's probably just better than EX Bad Moon.
Probably, yeah. You don't
Okay.
really need the extra speed, and it's 3 power instead of 1.
Right.
Or 3 extra power instead of 1.
Sure.
But yeah, so again, like this kind of runs into where Millia shines, which is she has good cards, she has good boosts. Your economy sort of like flows into canceling them a lot and trying to maintain pressure, because I think you do want to be striking because your boosts are like fine in neutral, but they're not amazing.
Right.
And just leveraging these good cards is where things really shine. All right, so your next sort of role player card, card that sort of is a mix up, hard to react to, is Swing Braid. So Swing Braid It's 1 to 4 basically, because you advance to 3-5, and if you play it when it's below curve and you advance past the opponent, you ignore guard.
Right.
That's pretty good. It's a fast poke that also happens to beat sweep and focus, though focus it like barely beats at at short range. You do have to respect their cross, but if their fast options are down, you just play swing braid.
Right.
They get whacked.
Because
The
and odds are, because I'm ignoring guard, I'm also going to get my ability. So this also probably frequently says, hit, advance or retreat 2 or draw 1.
Yeah, and so there are some considerations. If the opponent has access to a bunch of armor, like especially for cards that have a lot of armor that they lose on after, which is a more common card shape nowadays,
Right.
you will just lose clean to that. I think a notable example is Eno's 2 gauge, 3 gauge
You're
ultra.
talking about Ultimate Fortissimo.
Yeah, Ultimate
Yeah,
Fortissimo, where you have a bunch of armor and then you lose it, so it'll just lose to that. That's
sure,
if you have a bunch. If you have 3 or more armor, it just doesn't do
sure.
anything.
That's what
But
that's what Bad Moon is for.
yeah, well, Bad Moon. If you play that Ultimate Fortissimo and you eat Bad Moon, you're
Yeah, you're real
very
sad.
sad.
But a card like this, or a card like Tiger Uppercut that has this after lose all armor clause on it, eats Swing Braid pretty badly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's a mix-up card. One thing that's notable at Swing Braid is that Swing Braid, because it crushes slows, it's part of sort of a mix-up with cards like Low Kick or Grasp or not as much Cross or Slash, really, where you're trying to make the opponent play fast or just get stunned, because you don't usually have that many options against Swing Braid.
Right.
So it's good. It does hit for 3, which is not that much damage.
It's not
You're kind of just
exciting.
poking them.
Right.
So you have to be kind of careful about that. It does deliver Lust Shaker above curve also at further distances. If you're at range 4,
At
you
4,
can
sure.
throw Lust Shaker on it and hit for 6, which is pretty nice. If you give it a speed boost, so like Badass Swing Braid is really annoying to deal with, especially at range 2, because it's now on curve and hitting for 4.
On curve 4 damage that is almost definitely going to stun the opponent and give you your after seems pretty strong. Yeah.
Yeah, and similarly, Winger, where it's like on curve 3 damage and advantage that's going to stun,
Yep.
is with a subhuman self. It's pretty good. So there's a lot of flexibility to it. You just have to deal with the fact that its base damage relatively low, and honestly, it's like you're getting little wins here and there. You're fine with that. That's how you advance your game plan. It gets you gauge. It deletes and hopefully important cards from the opponent.
Right.
It's just good.
Sure. Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
it feels very much like a Noel card, where it's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
probably going to win combat. He's not going to win combat for a ton, but it's probably just going to win combat. But the difference is that I have, as like, Millia has quite a few ways to pump this up without spending a turn first. Like, she can do some cancelable boost nonsense to make this stronger, put badass on
Yep.
it to make it safer, and then still just win combat and kind of win for free.
It's a little expensive, but because you're getting an extra draw, you're pretty happy about that.
Right.
So you just keep your deck flowing.
Yep. Makes sense.
Spider's Thread is a little bit of a weird boost because it's got the +1 speed, and then you might pull 1. The pull 1 is really situational. There's a reason it's optional. It's basically, if the new range is better for you, then great.
Right.
If not, then
Or
don't.
if you're like here, right, and you're
Yeah,
like,
you get
cool,
them into the corner.
corner him.
Or if you're like here at a distance and you want to pull 1 to try and set up just get to a better range because your options at 6 are non-existent, and at
Sure.
5 it's only Iron Savior.
Sure.
So it's nice to have. Basically, the reason you'd pull 1 is to pull them into a better threat range, and that's fine. Those options are always good to have because they're action compression,
Right.
and especially pull 1 cancelable with a stat attached is just a pretty good boost.
Yep. Makes sense. So are you typically canceling this when you do play it though?
Typically, I know some people that's not as true because it's a boost. Like plus speed boosts are okay to not cancel or okay to just throw down as neutral boosts because the
Right.
opponent kind of has to respect them.
Right.
So I think I think Chico was talking about having playing this more like a neutral boost, and that's I've done that and it's worked, but I tend to cancel it, I think, more often than not. But that's going to be very exercised to the listener, or to the viewer as which do you think works better for you. They're both perfectly good.
Makes sense. And then swing braid versus a spider's thread. Do you find yourself using kind of both as you need to?
Yeah, so Swing Braid is a little worse later in the game when life totals are lower, just because it doesn't do that much damage and it's kind of vulnerable to counterattacks if you're using it as a fast poke.
Right.
But at the same time, it is an ignore card option, so it's always going to be nice. Spider's Thread tends to shine more in like setup situations where you can throw it onto another card. Throw it onto Bad Moon to cover a DP or EX cross if they have some silly thing.
Right.
Throwing it onto Tandem Top is really annoying for the opponent to deal with, because we'll talk about Tandem Top in a second.
Right.
Throwing it onto like Dive can be really good, or onto Cross to beat an uppercut, or onto Dust because it's plus speed. Dust is always nice, so that is still a mix up. So you got plenty of options. +1 speed, especially +1 speed and strike, is always just nice to have.
Definitely. And so it sounds like you might be playing this boost at times when you don't even need the pull. Like just +1 speed cancelable, no pull is if you're already at the right range and you're not going to use swing braid, that's kind of good enough for you.
Yeah, so +1 speed cancel is really good for a setup, and I think a lot of how Millia works is that she wants to set up like little mini strings that get you a clean win and are really hard for the opponent to deal with. And so this just is a way to do that. The pull is nice. The pull also helps you set those up if the opponent is not in a position for one, by just giving you an extra little bit of range band. So, yeah, it's very flexible. It's kind of whatever you feel makes the most sense. But the default is probably striking with it, just because it is above curve and it does have respectable reward on strike, especially if the opponent tends to skew slow. But if they're a character that has another option, like via armor to it, to deal with it, then I think it's more likely to get played as a boost.
Makes sense.
Also, if the opponent is holding up a bunch of fast options, like you see that their slows are down and their fasts are up, then I'm more likely to boost it, because it's more likely to lose.
And you'll be able to contest them a little bit better with those fast options because you'll have more speed.
Exactly, and vice versa. If they have a lot of slows up and their fast kind of down, you just play extras for
just start throwing swing braid because you're probably going to win. And honestly, if you lose to a grasp, like you lost for 3 damage.
Yeah, it's really not that bad.
It's not so bad. You gave him a gauge, you didn't get anything out of it, but things could be worse.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, Swing Braid, it's good. It and Bad Moon are kind of your like fast mix-up options. They're the 2 above curve cards.
Right.
And they're role players because they tend to crush things. They have really good boosts, and they're annoying to deal with. So that's kind of that one little pair.
Yep.
Then you've got Tandem Top. So Bad Moon is your best card. Tandem Top is competing pretty hard for second, and this card doesn't actually look that impressive. It's got like stats, right? It's got decent range band. It hits for 3, which is whatever. It's got 4 speed, which is kind of par for the course for these like 2 to 4 awkward attacks. And it's got 4 guard, which is again like feels a little awkward because it's gonna miss a lot of the time that 4 guard is relevant.
Right.
But this card is bonkers, and the reason for that is that if you're remember what I said earlier about your ability kind of just saving you turns is like the reason it's good.
Yeah.
Well, this just draws you 2.
Draws you 2 and also gives you movement if you want the movement.
Yeah. So you will see Millia striking with this on turn 1 if they're on play pretty frequently. Often the opponent's only answer is cross out, because it outspeeds dive, it doesn't move in if they cross or sweep, and if they assault in, it just gets hit on the 2.
Right.
So if they cross out, then like great, you just crossed out of a Tandem Top that was going to hit you for 3.
Right. And a lot of fast dives. First of all, they won't hit for 5, so they're not stunning this. And a lot of them wind up at range 2 somehow anyway. They either move 3 and then push 1, or they move 2.
Yeah. So it's pretty reliable, and a reliable hit draw 2 is an amazing thing to have on an aggressive character.
Right. And if they did play that dive, it could be 3 because you're drawing for your character ability as well.
Yep, exactly. And so other things, it's a really good EX because it goes up to 4 power, 5 speed, which means that it covers even more. Again, you can still cross out, so be careful. It is pretty good with boosts because it's relatively reliable. So like +1 speed makes it more reliable. Plus power just gives you more reward on hit, and it's relatively likely to hit. Um, it also has the after means that it's really hard as long as it doesn't get stunned. You're probably not going to lose the positioning in a strike because it's quite evasive with a flexible move too. Like it's not a lot of cards will cover all three of those move options to hit
Sure,
still hit you.
definitely.
And also because it's guardy, if they're really fast and they poke you, you at least get to move in and reposition.
Right,
So it's very unlikely to be bad, and it's very likely to be very good.
right. And it can also, in some cases at least, it can also sync up or synergize well with your character ability. I mean, I can think of a couple board states where advanced four would be useful as an after, but it's you're getting there's a lot of movement in this card and potentially a lot of draw too.
Yeah, and what's nice is that the draw and the move, you get both in Tandem Top, right? Your
Right,
ability you choose. Tandem Top gives you the movement and the draw,
right,
and the movement doesn't even have to hit. So it's just a good card. It does a lot of things. You're probably going to want to play this card
right,
consistently, and it's very likely to get situations where it works. It's not amazing on defense because getting speed tied by dive is sad, and you also get stunned in the process.
right,
So it's more of an offensive card, but it's just a good offensive card.
right. And it sounds like, because I'm trying to confirm this, most of the time I'm playing it at 4. But
Or at a
Millia,
closer range with speed boosts or things,
oh,
you're
sure, sure, sure. Still dodges a sweep at range 2 if I'm uh like it's still it mid speed that backs me up still can dodge things. Um but also, I mean, Millia seems like she's got a lot of movement in her kit. Getting to range 4 during a strike does not, or in order to set up a strike, does not seem that hard for her.
It's not. The other thing is that if you're striking at range 2, I mean, the opponent's options to respect are like Bad Moon, Swing Braid, Tandem Top, Iron Savior, basically, and
Right.
then Cross slash Spike
That's
or a slow,
you just
which
named
is a
half.
lot.
You just named half her kit. Like,
And so notably, a couple of those are like if they're playing if they want to like defend with Slash, for example, which is the thing that beats Tandem Top,
right, they're gonna lose to
loses
Bad
to Bad
Moon.
Moon, loses to Swing Braid, loses to Cross, loses to Slash,
Right,
beats Spike and Swing Braid, loses to Sweep, loses to Focus. So
right,
like you're loses to Iron Savior. So you are talking about playing, the low percent option pretty aggressively, and usually that's the only thing that beats Bad Moon,
right,
or
right.
that beats Tandem Top. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, some characters have other on curve at 3 options, but many of them don't move you in, and most of them don't do more than 4 damage.
Yeah, so you're talking about just a very reliable shape, even if you do weird things with it, but much more reliable if you're striking.
Makes sense.
Because breaking this at 5 speed is pretty hard.
Right.
You'll get, and a lot of the things that do, some of them will push.
Yep.
So
Oh, true.
you're talking about like, oops, we we managed to get ourselves caught in Tin Top anyways.
Right.
Yeah, this card is phenomenal. Should be a high priority to land if you can. It's not going to win by a lot in terms of sheer damage, but it gives you a lot of resource and positioning and abstract things,
Right. I mean, in
for
terms
sure.
of you count it in force, right? So draw 2 is at least 2 force. Advance to retreat 2, that's another 2, maybe more if you're crossing up your opponent. That's a lot of value.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I've heard sometimes that like the exchange rate is like you can kind of measure damage in force too. Sometimes it's like 1 damage per force or something. And this is no matter what the exchange rate is, it's getting up there in terms of value.
yeah, that's like the Poulter theory of card analysis, and
Yes.
I think on most metrics, this card would do really well. Like this is the card that if if you had it, I think on a custom, people would be like, this card might be a little bit pushed.
Right.
So play it. It's an unofficially released character, and it's one of her better cards.
It's
So
it's real good.
just
Okay.
do it.
Makes sense.
So yeah, it doesn't look like all that much until you start playing with it, and then you're like, oh, this card rules. So yeah, it's also got a very silly boost, and you mentioned earlier about how she's hard to corner.
Yes.
This boost is actually why.
Oh god, this has recursion on it. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, so it's Advanced Retreat 2, which is not amazing. Having Advanced Retreat 2 is a fine thing to have on a boost, But if you advance past them, you get it to your hand, and you get to draw one for your trouble.
Right.
So that's really good. A lot of times, a lot of characters will try and enforce a mix-up situation where they really need to be at 2 or really need to be at 1. See, Biken, Gold Lewis. Let's see who else. Obviously, Potemkin. What are some characters who this is like particularly good against? Potemkin hates this card, by the way, because being able to always not be at range 1 is pretty annoying. May kind of likes enforcing range 1 mix-up. Soul's kind of agnostic. Nago has mixed feelings. Kai likes range 2 mix-up a lot. Yeah, so basically, if you
though, you're naming half the cast of this season who likes to enforce a certain spot. This just hoses all of them.
So it does continually cost you gauge because you do have to you probably want to cancel it after playing it if you're gonna like really take advantage. So you can just play it as a move 1 that gets you resources and happens to cross up in the process. But
even though I'm returning it to my hand, I can still cancel it.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
That's just part of the effect.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Cancel is kind of its own thing. It does not require the boost to actually be on the table.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, if you are in the corner, say at range 1 to the opponent, like against Potemkin or something,
right,
and you, for example, you crossed out and he hammerfall to chase you into the corner, and you play this to advance 2 and then draw 2 cards, 1 for turn and 1 for the boost, you're pretty happy with that, and it stays in your hand. Potemkin has to deal with Tandem Top, which is really annoying for him because it's a consistent fast retreat or mid-speed retreat. So you're looking all right. It's really good in situations where the opponent has a particular range they like. So yeah, it's really good. You're probably not going to be playing it too often for retreat opportunities unless it like wins you a game or gets you a like stuff because the advance has so much more goodness attached to it.
Definitely.
But just having cancel movement is, that said, very nice. You need to retreat and strike, and that's what we win the game. Then just let it go back.
Right. But because Tandem Top is so crazy, is it hard to play Kapel? And should I kind of be reserving it for those characters who have those really delicate range bands, or am I just using this when it's good?
I mean, we're going to forget about the last line of text on Kapel.
Oh, true. Yeah, fair point. You're definitely not losing Tandem Top. You are losing gauge most of the time.
You are losing gauge, but you have to have gauge to work with. But yes, it returns itself to your head, so you can play Kapel and Tandem Top.
Okay, so this is the
and
kind
you can play Kapel like 3 times and then Tandem Top.
Right. This is the kind of card that that Potemkin's parrying. Then, right?
Probably. I mean, you have a bunch of cards that he doesn't like. Bad Moon's pretty rough for him,
right.
But this card is quite annoying. I would not be. I mean, I'm not a huge Potemkin player, but I would not find it weird if he parried this.
Makes sense. So, really quick here, if I've got a decent chunk of gauge, could I do just on my turn, boost Kapel, advance past the opponent, return it to my hand, cancel Kapel, boost past the opponent. Each time I'm drawing 1, by the way.
Yeah, so you're basically doing like a free change cards.
It's a change cards action in the middle of my movement.
Yes, that is honestly a pretty reasonable thing to do. I've done it not super often, but it's pretty reasonable because sometimes you just need cards and have too much gauge.
Sure.
And that does it without spending an action. You obviously don't get like the 2 force from your ultras if you do that because you're spending like 1 gauge. But yeah, I mean, if you think that's useful and it like often is reasonably useful, go for it. You do have to be careful if you do it twice, right? You go back to your initial position. So if you actually cared about where it was, you have to do it maybe an odd number of times.
But I mean,
number of times.
You could also do if you really want to make range. God, this is actually a little bit crazy. This boost. Now that I'm thinking it through, you're right. So if I do this, and I'm like, awesome, Kapel, advance past the opponent, return it to my hand, cancel, Kapel, retreat.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, that's That's a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. You sadly cannot do Kapel Advance, Kapel Retreat, Strike with the Tandem Top, because that would be really good.
And I also can't, because I'm retreating on the second one, I also can't put it back in my hand to do it again after that.
Right. And by sadly, I mean, like, for game balance reasons.
Yeah,
that would probably be too good.
But you mean thank goodness.
But yeah, no, Kapel is really good. Top is really good. They both sort of give you a lot of screen control, and it's very hard for characters to contest it without literally just like punching you out of Tandem Top.
Right.
Which involves hitting both hard and fast. So defensive Tandem Top is particularly awkward against characters like Ino or Giovanna, where they've gotten their exceed mode and now they're hitting a little bit harder, and so that 4 is just less good.
Just hard enough to really be threatening.
Yeah, so you have to be a lot more careful then.
Right.
But until then, like just press this button. It's a good button.
Makes sense.
Get to look silly upside down or something.
Is this the meme from Millia where she's doing this and you're dodging Millia's mix up? Or no, it's
no, that's
Millia players, our mix-ups aren't that crazy. Millia's mix-ups is just her diving back and forth across them.
Yeah, so heavy tandem. So the way that it works in Strive is that like slash tandem top is a little disc that you throw forward that's just like take space and can sometimes combo.
Right.
But heavy slash tandem top is a disc that like sits on the opponent and forces them to block for a little bit while you do stuff. And so yeah, the meme is you throw down heavy tandem top and then you just jump over them and use your multiplayer dashes to dash back and forth until they get really confused and disorientated.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yes, this is the meme.
This is fun. That sounds like a good time then.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Which I'm trying to remember which move Kapel is, because Kapel is definitely something.
We can check out Dust Loop after the lesson.
So Kapel's her air combo ender, like thing where she pops the flower, I think, in front of her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's 10 on top. It's the meme. It's good. Play it. So Iron Savior.
Yes.
This card as sort of has come up a bunch. This card's really good on offense.
Okay.
On defense, it is still pretty good, but it loses really hard to sweep.
Yes, it does. 5 guard 2 speed is real scary.
It does pretty good into everything but sweep. I mean, like dive usually double whiffs. Dust it tends to get stunned. So like dust and spike. Dust, dive and dust, aka spike. It tends to like have some trouble with, as any slow would.
Right.
But it is a 1 to 5 sweep essentially that loses a guard and a power in the process, and that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yes, that sounds all right. So at range 4
match in particular.
At range 4, I'm feeling fine with this. At range 5, I'm feeling fine with this. Closer up, it's got utility, but it is a little bit dicey. At 1, it's a cross catcher.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I'm at range 1 and at range 1 in particular, because dive and dust both miss. If I'm at range 1, like I just slam this, because what are they gonna do? Trade? That's fine. I don't mind. Maybe they eat Swing Braid and their card dies. If they play a fast to try and counter something, then they lose pretty bad. They get swept. They get stunned. I hit them for 5, which is pretty good because that's hard for me to hit them for 5.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's good. It also synergizes pretty well with like Writhe and Pain, for example, because Writhe and Pain it's a pretty consistent shape, and so giving it extra power is nice. Similarly, Lust Shaker, because if you give it up to 3 power, it's going to pretty much stun anything.
Dealing with sweep and stuff. So when you talked earlier about Bad Moon, that it is a good boost delivery mechanism. One of the ways to be that is above curve anything, right? If you're at the range where Bad Moon hits, odds are you are going to hit with it, and that means that whatever value you put from the boost is going to go off. Another one is guarded advancing option. Right, like a Tatsu or like Iron Savior or even like Faultless Defense slash. The big thing is just
how many things your card beats, right? If you're likely to at least hit, it's a good boost delivery method. If you're a little more committal, if it's a card like, for example, like Low Kick, where it's a grasp like, where it's 1 to 1 whatever 7, that's fine as a boost delivery mechanism. It'll hit, but because you need to be at range 1, it's a little more situational, right?
Sure.
You're not as likely, and it also doesn't have that much built-in value with only 2 power.
Right.
Grasp, same boat. It's good, but it's kind of a lower damage attack. Slash, however, you have more power. You're at a pretty flexible range band where you just need to be at range 3. A lot of cards will try and beat Slash by trading with it, and
Yep.
so
Anything you
a
put on
good
top of
boost
that,
will,
sure,
yeah,
sure, sure,
will
sure.
break that.
So Iron Savior is kind of in that category where because it's an advancing option, because I have a flexible range band to play it is. I mean, 1 to 5 is very, very flexible. Odds
Yeah,
are it's just gonna give me whatever I got, whatever I put on it.
yeah. And so the most likely things to put on, your various +1 power or plus more than 1 power, like
Right.
Breath in Pain or Lust Shaker or Let's Rock, are all pretty
Sure.
nice. Badass is a little silly because now you beat Spike also.
Yep.
You're vulnerable to dive specifically.
So
So
so not necessarily other than Lust Shaker, you're not necessarily hitting incredibly crucial breakpoints with that, but you are getting value out of your boost almost guaranteed.
yeah, and so what's interesting is that, for example, Writhe in Pain, if you play Writhe in Pain, they're looking at you hitting them pretty hard, right? You might throw a non-curve tandem top or a bad moon or a swing braid
Right.
or a slash. The big thing about a card like Writhe in Pain, where the opponent has random discard, is that it does a bunch of little things, and discarding 2 is way better than discarding 1. So for
Right.
Iron Savior, which might make them discard again, you can just counterattack and strip their hand really quickly.
Right. Okay. So
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 it
so
just synergizes nicely with other stuff.
it's not breakpoint math necessarily, but it is compounding value because you are getting more out of the
Yeah,
boost.
exactly.
Sure. Makes sense.
It's also a quite good cross counter. Not a lot of cards will strictly beat cross at range 2 without
At
having
range
some kind of
two.
commitment,
Right.
and
A,
this
a,
does.
a lot of cross counters are cross counters at range 1 in particular because they're range 4 or something.
Or are range 2 to something, and so like 2 to 5. So you have to kind
Oh,
of commit to
they
them not
require
playing slash.
like a hard call out or something, right?
Yeah, and this will also beat slash in the process.
Right.
So they have to kind of call this out specifically with a card like Dust, and everything else that you have beats Dust.
Right.
I
Okay.
think I think like literally everything except for Sweep and Focus, because all the fast beat Dust, your fast beat Dust, Tandem Top beats Dust because it
Right.
advances in or out. Or yeah, so it's a little specific, but you just play on Savior. I'm much more likely to play it on offense than on defense,
Sure.
but other than that, it's just really good.
And also, I'm noticing that there's some timing synergy after if the opponent is stunned. That looks an awful lot like this. So
Yeah, so you really want to stun.
this is like a compounding thing where like, all right, you discard a random card. That feels bad. Also, I draw a card, or also I gain advantage, or also you discard another card, and also I draw a card. Like that. That's very you called it earlier like a rich get richer mechanic. Like
Yeah,
that's punishing to get hit by, or I'm sorry,
exactly.
get stunned by in particular.
Yeah, so if you throw, Sweep or Focus into this and Millia trades down 1, it's not that bad, but she's losing a decent amount of value in the process,
Right.
which is
It's
just
like the opportunity cost of not having gotten the after and the other after can add up.
yeah, and, she's a little bit privileged in that her cards have pretty good value attached, and so not getting that might feel bad, but also, who cares? Your cards are pretty good,
Right.
but
Sure.
that is, like, the main way to beat Millia is, you deny her value, you try and deny her mix-ups, or you make it hard for her to set up, and
Right.
so that's kind of annoying.
Sure.
So, yeah, Iron Savior, really good, pretty flexible, really good at range 1 or also, like, 4 to 5, where you're gonna probably get the hit and maybe trade down. If they're low on slow cards, because a lot of characters, like, their only really good slow options are something like Sweep and Focus, and those are starting to run out. This card is much better because it'll just trade up.
Sure. Yeah. It's just a reliable. Though it'd probably even be better on defense in that situation because the one thing that beats it is maybe it's down.
Yep. Yeah, so, you kinda play the situation, but it's a very good card. It'll
Sure.
it'll come up a lot.
I'm noticing a
So
theme.
yeah, no, her cards are good. That's because her ability is kind of situational.
Right.
So she makes up for that and she doesn't really have like her ability doesn't make her cards stronger. It just lets her play her cards more effectively.
More easily and more flexibly. Sure.
Yeah. So that's really how she works. Turbo Fall is a bit of a weird boost. It's just very similar to her other stuff. Gives you movement and hit gain advantage. This boost is nice. It's pretty good, and I think it is reasonable to play instead of Iron Savior if you have a hand that can like really take advantage of it. And so what that means is basically the kind of obvious card to pair with this is Dust
Sure.
because it fixes the gap in Dust's range and also gives it advantage and also you probably stun.
Right.
And Dust also has pretty high power. So like Dust with Turbo Fall is really good. Dive with Turbo Fall is pretty good. Slash is pretty good, or Cross with Turbo Fall because they can like move around more. So in general, it's going to be good. Probably a little better with normals. Your cards are already pretty flexibly curved, so
Sure.
like you don't. I think the notable exception is Tandem Top because Tandem Top with Turbo Fall doesn't have that range one hole anymore.
Right. Yeah, so now you're
And
definitely getting your draw two.
yeah, and potentially Septem, but Septem is a little. That's like a range 5 type play, and that's a bunch of gauge for probably 4 damage.
Right.
But it is also more advantage, and more advantage is always nice. So it's a good card. It helps your slow cards have more range. It helps your sort of mid speeds be more reliable, which is pretty nice. And it gives you advantage, and hopefully lets you leverage your card draw. Basically, play it if you think it's going to help your situation and you don't think Iron Savior is like amazing now, especially if they have a lot of slows up, for example, and you think they're just going to trade into Iron Savior.
Right.
And a lot of those characters who do tend to have a lot of slows tend to be weak to something like a Turbo Fall Dive or Turbo Fall Dust. So it's very much a what does the board look like? What does the situation look like in the
Sure.
character? Also, it's cancelable, so you can just wait for the right time and then play it and cancel it.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, Turbo. So Iron Savior, good card. Turbo Fall, good boost.
Yep. And again, like I think the only time that we haven't said that is Swing Braid and Spider Thread, which are both still like Swing Braid sounds like it's a little bit ahead of Spider Thread. Everything else has been like pretty even in terms of what you're valuing these cards at.
Yeah, so like great card, great boost, great card, great boost, but also you can still play the card.
Right.
Good card, good boost, but like
Yep.
yeah, the card's probably a little better, but it's still situational. Good, maybe great card, and like good boost, but again, little situational.
Sure.
Decent card, great boost, sort
Okay.
of.
We found one. We
So
found we found
yeah,
a we found a recommendation.
so low kick. Well, I'm not going to go that far. So low kick is a grasp like, right? So it's inherently good just for being grasp like because having speed 7 options is always really good to have.
Sure.
It is unfortunately.
The,
Oh
the,
yeah,
the
go ahead.
number of times that I check my opponent's discard to see if their grasp are down at range one so I can play some kind of mid speed nonsense are very, very high. So
Yeah.
having another speed 7 helps with that.
So it's a pretty good card on defense. Unfortunately, the hit effect doesn't do squat on defense, right? Hit gain
Right.
advantage on defense on a fast card is like
Sure.
basically pointless.
Does not matter.
But on offense, it's only 2 power and it will trade super down with everything.
Right.
So with that said, it's pretty good because remember how I've been talking a lot earlier about like what's if the opponent's fasts are down, or if the opponent's slows are down,
Yeah.
because you're a character who can pressure hand and pressure deck pretty effectively.
Mhm.
If the opponent's slows are down, this card is very silly because if they're
Sure.
going to get stunned by it, you're talking just like you poke them, you get an advantage, you get a gauge. They can't really do much about it. Keep going. 2
And
power,
get your after as well. Yeah.
yeah, and get your after as well. So 2 power is not enough to break EX armor guard, which is potentially a risk.
Right.
If they EX into low kick, they probably trade up at least, but you still gain advantage unless they EX, EX slashed or something.
Sure.
But for the most part, you can play this card basically if the situation calls for it, or you can just hold a copy to stop opponents speed 6, like range 1 options, which are
Right.
surprisingly common,
And
as
and
long as they're not EX'd.
and eventually you're going to swing braid their sweeps. And now it's time to do low kick stuff.
Yeah, low kick also it's a respectable boost delivery method because it's your boosts tend to be cancelable and it's range 1. and speed 7, so it's pretty good with, for example, Writhe and Pain, where you get to move them and discard a card and do an extra damage and gain advantage. It's pretty good with Lust Shaker for the same reason. You spent a bunch of resources, but you probably dodge their counterattack and also gained advantage in the process.
Yep.
So, that's pretty good. It's not great with Subhuman Self because you don't need more speed and advantage on it. It
Or
already has
advantage, right?
advantage, and it's already fast. It's pretty good with Badass because you're probably gonna hit with it, and hitting with EXs is nice, but it's not like great with Badass. The extra speed doesn't help it that much.
Right.
The extra power is nice. The extra guard is kind of pointless, and the armor is nice, I guess. Let's Rock it's very good with because you get a bunch of stuff and also advantage. So, but Let's Rock is your only non-cancelable card in existence. So
Right.
cry a little.
The only one. Oh yeah, I guess other than this boost is not technically cancelable, but yes, it is.
It's parry.
And
It's
then
parry and Let's
parry.
Rock.
Right. Yeah, that's all you got.
Yeah. So low kick. It's a little situational. It's very very good sometimes and like pretty bad other times, but that's fine. You just figure out what you're going to do with it, and if you don't know what to do, you play the boost.
Right.
So this boost is absurdly low commitment, right? If you play it, you draw another card and take another action, so you didn't really lose anything unless the advanced one gets you way out of position. Which your Millia, like your cards are a little specific ranged, but they're not that weird. Basically, if you don't know what to do with low kick, you can just boost Mirage. It's probably fine.
It's probably just
It's
good.
it's probably just gonna worst case, it was a different card and you advanced one in the process. You get a card and you get another action.
Yeah.
So basically, if you think you can use low kick, if you think the situation is going to be there, hold low kick and maybe try and get value out of it. If you don't, or if the advanced one is super important, you can boost Mirage.
Just boost it. It's all good.
And if the advanced one is bad, then if you're in a situation where the advanced one doesn't help you, then just hold it in your hand because EX Mirage or EX low kick is super annoying for a lot of characters to deal with at range 1. Just because it's speed 8 option.
Yep.
And you've got some card filtering where you can kind of get that. So yeah, it's a role player, it does stuff. It's often good, sometimes even very good, but it's not like hey, this card is amazing and I always have to respect it because it's super scary. It just does stuff.
It just does stuff. Can you explain to the audience what you mean by card filtering? That doesn't come up super often on our lessons.
Okay, so card filtering is basically when you tend to draw a lot of cards and then discard cards where you're searching for specific things, or you tend to hold cards in your hand for a while to look for ways to play them properly.
Right.
And because Millia is pretty aggressive and tends to only play cards when they're good is kind of the big goal with her, because her cards tend to be very good at specific ranges, then she will often just you might just be sitting on low kick for a while, or you might try and filter it out. You get rid of it and draw another card.
Right.
So, yeah, you're likely to try and hold cards until they are in a good spot, and you are going to probably be preparing or changing cards a bunch, and maybe you just maybe you toss it in and change cards also.
Right.
But if you want the range 1, then just Mirage and then change cards for 1 less. You're still getting the extra card out of the deal.
Sure. Right. Makes sense.
So, yeah. So it's rarely bad. It's not obviously great like the rest of her kit tends to be, but it's you don't really cry about it.
It's decent, sure. You can find uses for it. Certainly, you can find uses for Mirage if you find it in your hand because it is so low commitment. But yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's her specials.
Yeah, her ultras are kind of in the same boat as low kick. They're both good, but they're both a little underwhelming. So Septem at range 2, so it's above curve at range 4. It's a 2 gauge ultra, so it's not that hard to play. But you have a lot of things you want to spend gauge on. In particular, change cards and canceling. So spending 2 gauge is kind of a commitment, especially if the opponent just happens to beat it with a guardy option like a projectile or something.
Yep.
It gives you respectable value. So you draw a card, you sweep a card, you push or pull 1, and then maybe you get another card or movement out of your ability.
Right.
But it's not actually that much damage. So it's good defensively at range 4 if they don't have a way to beat it. It's generally good offensively, and I'm like rarely sad to play it, but I'm not like committing to playing it. It is also 2 force, and you kind of need your force. So you're seeing it a lot as like a 2 force change cards or a Lust Shaker discard or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so like it's kind of hard to say too much about because it's not as much of an obvious role player as her specials are, where the specials are like crushingly strong. It's if you throw it at range 3, there's often not a lot they can do about it unless they have a specific answer. But if they have like a card that's kind of like Tandem Top, where it's a 2 to 4 with some guard, maybe a projectile, then that'll beat it. So
Right.
you
But
know,
but this does beat every normal at range 3.
yes, it does beat every normal at range 3, which is pretty
Right.
nice. They can cross out though,
True. Yeah, that's a good point.
and you've committed a decent amount of resources if they do.
Right.
So yeah, like it's good. Play it when you think it's right. If you're worried about EX slash, be careful, or a similar EX, or a bad moon type above curve range 3. Also, it's really good at range 4. So yeah, it's a good card. It's like not amazing. It's not great, I would say, but it's good, and
Okay.
it's not bad to play. If you can give it advantage, it's also a bit better. Like if you can throw Turbo Fall on it, because then you can better take advantage of the fact that you just drew a card and moved them and made them discard a random card.
Yeah.
Or if you win with it on defense, it's better because you can put them somewhere and then immediately jump them.
Sure. And
But
at range
without
4,
that,
this is a perfectly fine defensive option because you are above curve, so you can often do that
yeah,
at your preferred range.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So like it's good. Writhe in Pain also very good. I'd say Writhe in Pain's probably better than the Ultra, but they're both solid. It's again gives you a bunch of little things, gives you some power, gives you some movement, gives you a sweep. It's like a mini version of the Ultra, right? It kind of like staples the Ultra onto one of your other cards.
Right.
Um, and those are all good things to have. It's basically it helps you fight the opponent's resources, and so it's much better on a card with advantage, like low kick or slash. It's much better if the opponent already has low hand size, where you're doing something. It's good on Iron Savior
Yep.
because Iron Savior is pretty consistent, and you get to make him potentially discard 2 cards. And also, Iron Savior tends to leave at range 1, and push or pull to choose between 1 and 2 is nice to have. So yeah, it's good. It's a card you'll play. It's a boost you'll play. It's a card you'll also spend for 2 force if you need it. It's very situational.
Makes sense.
If you're not like winning, right? If you're not like hitting a bunch of stuns and getting resources, I think this is a card that's relatively likely to be used to keep your hand size big with the change cards, unless you really need to protect that range 4 or speed 5 band.
Right.
Though.
Sure.
I think it's not like just high on your list of gauge spend. Winger is a little bit of the opposite. So Winger is fine. It's 7 power, which means it crushes sweep, and it's your like best anti-sweep option outside of Swing Braid. But unfortunately, it is 3 gauge, which is a big commitment. It's got a lot of power means that it like makes your weak attacks better because you just if I have to hit you 9 times to win, then taking 2 or 3 of those times in one go is pretty helpful.
Oh, I see. Okay, so having like this would not be impressive on Ryu because Ryu's already
yeah.
chunking you for 6 every time he hits you.
Comparing Ryu's like Hado Ultra to Winger is
right.
Like those cards are not in the same tier.
No, I mean
Winger is bad compared to like most big ultras.
What are you doing here? They're both 3 gauge. They're yeah, I mean for people who have not seen the Ryu lesson, if you are newer to Exceed, just to demo what we're talking about here, like not all ultras are created equal. This is a incredibly strong card with an incredibly strong boost on it. But yeah, no, I definitely see your point. But in terms of what Millia is doing with her kit, in terms of the damage, this is one of the first times that the number 7 has even come up. This is for her. It's a lot of power.
You'll see it on Winger and you'll see it on Lust Shaker, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And so that's why Winger is good, basically. And the other thing about Winger is that it only really works at range 1. You know, if it's not at range 1, then you're talking about a below curve
5?
below curve 5 for 3 gauge.
Right.
That's just, like,
That's
pathetic.
really, really bad. And it's like, okay, so I'll play it where it's below curve at 1 and I'll hit for 7, or I'll play it where it's below curve at 2 and I'll hit for 5. It's not like with Swing Braid, where if you play it where it's above curve, you're not getting something. If you play it where it's below curve, you do. It's below
Yeah.
curve in both situations.
Like, Winger is often worse than Swing Braid.
Right.
Like, in a lot of situations, Winger is just worse than Swing Braid.
Right.
And that's fine because when it's better, it chunks them for
It
7.
hits for 7 on a character who doesn't hit for 7 very often.
But it's 3 gauge, and if it's not hitting for 7, it's pretty sad.
It's really bad, right?
So the ways to make Winger better, you can throw more power onto it, which makes it still quite committal, but and adds more gauge cost, but means that you're hitting them even harder.
Right.
Probably the best way to make Winger good is if their crosses and grasps and equivalent are down, and then
Sure.
you can just throw it, because then what are they gonna do? They'll eat Winger.
Sure. And if you're taxing their resources with some of your other cards that can only be dealt with cross and grasp, now you've got
Yeah.
7 power online.
Yeah, like low kick Winger is a mix up, right?
Sure.
If you badass it, it gets quite a bit scarier, because are you willing to throw grasp into a Millia with a badass, or throw cross into Millia with a badass?
And are you willing to
And
throw
specifically
focus?
grasp?
Are you willing to throw focus when this will stun it now?
Yeah. So badass is probably the best thing to stick onto Winger.
Right.
And you know, that's fine. I I've definitely played Winger, but I've also had a reasonable number of games where I wild swung Winger and it happened to win, and that was amazing. So, we take those.
Makes sense.
If they wild swing, if they strike into you with a slow at range 1 and you wild swing Winger, they are
You're feeling pretty good.
having a bad time.
Yeah.
So yeah, Winger, it's fine. It's kind of like low kick, where it's a little situational. It's a bit of a commitment, and when it works, it's really nice. But I wouldn't, really, really go for it. And similar to low kick, the boost is phenomenal.
Yep.
Miraz, super low opportunity cost, great upside when that's one's amazing. Subhuman Self, plus speed and advantage is just not a thing that happens a lot in Exceed. That's a very good combination of things to have.
That's a really strong boost. There's a couple of I know Kai has that on a special, and that's really, really good.
And if I recall correctly, Kai's is that the one that's not cancelable? Like Kai's
I
one
don't
really
think it. I
awkward
don't think it
boost?
is. I think it's Holy Orders.
No,
I
it
think,
is. It is cancelable. Yeah, it's
yeah,
Holy
I
Orders.
think you're thinking of Faith or whatever. But yeah, it's Faith is that one. It's
No, actually, no. All of Kai's boosts are cancelable. Never mind. My
yeah,
memory of Kai is incorrect.
yeah, you're thinking of Faith that isn't cancelable, but this guy, Holy Orders, +1 speed gate advantage. This is a ridiculous boost as well. We're just to give people insight into what we're talking about here. That's crazy. This is crazy. Tell the people why it's crazy, Andarel.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I was thinking of Faith. Yeah. So basically, +1 speed advantage means you're probably going to hit. You're probably going to get an advantage.
Right.
That's nice. It's a good thing to have. The big thing about plus speed and advantage is that plus speed and advantage is one of the best ways in the game to just like kill the opponent, because if they are low on hand size, you can like pretty much automatically pressure. If they are low on health, you can pretty much automatically pressure. If they're in a situation where they're stuck eating multiple attacks in a row and those attacks have plus stats, it's just very hard to deal with that, because plus speed tends to reduce answers, and advantage reduces cards in hand or makes you wild swing if you just keep striking.
Right, and we
And
have a whole
worst case, this is
we have a whole boost that's quite strong that makes you wild swing. If you can do that just by pressuring resources, you're in good shape.
and like worst case, this is +1 speed, like hit draw 2, because you prepare, you strike, and then you prepare afterwards.
Sure.
So it's a very good boost. It's if you don't really feel like going through the brain power of trying to make Winger work, you just play this boost. It's like bad on low kick. It's great on bad moon. It's great on swing braid. It's great on tandem top. It's great on Iron Savior, because it gives Iron Savior advantage. The speed might matter.
Yep.
It's great on Septem, because it covers even more options, and it starts beating a lot of EXs, and it beats Cross.
It's
At,
great
at
on
range 3, like, no way to deal with it.
it's great on
Yeah,
pretty much all your normals except maybe Slash.
honestly, it gives Slash plus speed, and you draw an extra card out of the deal, because it's draw 1 or gain
Oh,
advantage,
that's true.
so...
That's true. If you are gaining advantage anyway, might as well just get some card draw.
Yeah, like, low kick and Slash get an extra card draw. I think
So
that's
like,
probably why that clause exists.
so like, don't
It's bad on,
don't
like, block.
yeah, don't put it on low kick or block, and you're probably in business.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like, crazy on dive, because dive gets very silly with plus speed.
Yep.
Pretty good on dust. Dust is still a little unreliable, so you might not. But yeah, you still plus speed on dust. That's never bad.
Yeah, that's always very strong.
So yeah, no, it's a great boost. Just do it. But yeah, so I think this is kind of what Millia comes down to, which is you have a lot of good boosts and good cards.
Yes.
You don't have a lot of crazy overwhelming synergies that you can use to make your cards like super bonkers, because they have kind of low power. They tend to be better on offense or like on defense by 1 speed. And you do need gauge to keep your things going, because you are often spending either multiple cards per strike, right? Because you're like boost strike to try and get the options, or you're playing mix-ups.
Right.
So and you get rewarded for winning strikes, and you have to kind of choose as a Millia player, do you want to be a little more expensive, probably have to prepare more, probably have to like be a little more slow paced, but have a much higher win rate on your strikes? Or do you want to play more mix ups, try and like just go fast and loose and try and leave the opponent more outs, but get to strike more often,
Right.
basically?
Hence
And
why,
those are sort of the paths you can take.
hence why changing cards is such a high priority for you, because at some point you are going to need to be able to like thread that needle.
Exactly.
And decide again which one you want to go down, and now you have another chance to.
Yep. And you might do a little bit of both, and because if the opponent is doing really well, you might need to play a little bit riskier. If the opponent is sort of on the back foot, you can sort of lean off the gas and take it just more consistent, right? A
Right.
little bit safer.
So
So
you're not
yeah,
you're not necessarily a rushdown character, but you are maintaining aggression and tempo and leveraging a resource advantage to be striking often, but you are looking for ways to get to where your good cards are good, and you are using your boosts to get there. You're making little combos, but all of this stuff is going to be resource negative. So anything you can do to maintain card flow is going to win you games.
yeah, and so that's why Tandem Top is so good, right? Because that's your sort of cheat code to card flow.
Right. Okay.
And so landing Tandem Top is a really high priority, just because 2 cards off 1 strike it gives you a lot of gas to work with.
Right.
Similarly, just getting stuns, trying to figure out how the opponent works, and like relying on whether you want to choose to commit. If they throw an EX, do you think it's an EX dust or dive? Are you willing to commit like a 5 speed or a bad moon to try and beat it? Or are you sort of looking to play it really safe and deal with your cards are pretty good, which
Yep.
means that you can afford to wild swing.
Okay.
You will run the risk of like missing your wild swings, right? Because if your cards are good in sort of limited
Right.
situations,
There's not a ton of like, oh, you're not where it's like everything you have hits at range 2 and is awesome at range 2 or 3, but you've got good cards.
yeah. So like sometimes your wild swings will just randomly win,
Right.
and you also kind of need your hand. So I tend to wild swing on defense a fair amount with her, just because why not?
Sure.
If I lose the strike, I lose the strike, and I am pretty incentivized to be the one to strike, I find. Or if I'm on defense, I want to be on defense with a boost down.
Okay. So
And
you
I can
are
do that, right?
you this cancelable thing is an option, right? It's a strong option, and you'll often do it. But but like Spider's Thread having this little clock next to it does not mean that you can't just put a boost down and say go.
Yeah, and honestly, the fact that on a character like this, where all your boosts are good and cancelable, you sometimes choose not to cancel is really a reflection of the fact that her economy can be kind of fragile. If the opponent isn't getting stunned and maybe has discard effects and like manages to deal with any kind of pressure, whether it's an advantage chain, whether it's this a good sweep, whether it is just they forced you to move because they're a ranger and you were just stuck without your Iron Saviors stuck with your Iron Saviors at the bottom of your deck.
Sure.
then you have to deal with the fact that your cards in hand are actually pretty precious. They are good cards, and you need to use them wisely.
Right.
And so gauge is basically more cards in hand, right? Because of change cards. So you don't just want to be throwing away your gauge to do cancels if you don't have to.
Right. And also same for the ultras, same for the exceed. Having the ability to refill your hand at a moment's notice is really, really important.
Yeah, gas is gas. If you don't have a big hand and you don't have a lot of gauge, you don't have much to work with outside of a couple of above curve options, which
Right.
is better than most characters can say. But the thing about Millia is that if you want to make your attacks like insane, you don't have a lot of tricks to do that, right? You have Lust Shaker and you have Badass, and the rest of your boosts are like a couple of little benefits.
Right. And there's some cards that they go very well with to make kind of a combo, but they aren't a combo. Like we already talked about Ryu and we showed Metsu Hadoken. The other side of Metsu Hadoken is Way of the Warrior, which is +2 power, +2 speed. There are very few things that +2 power, +2 speed doesn't just make good. It makes them like sometimes unbeatable.
Yeah,
You don't have a
and
lot of that.
and the other thing is, even if your card is unbeatable, like a +2 speed Swing Braid is often unbeatable.
Oh,
That's
sure. Yeah, for 3
like
damage.
I can throw Love the Subhuman Self, Spider's Thread, Swing Braid. Love Subhuman Self, cancel, Badass cancel, Swing Braid. All right, and now I am guaranteed hitting for 4, ignore guard, advantage. Right,
Yep.
that is really good. But also, I just spent 6 force in the
Yeah,
process. Right.
I mean every cancel requires the boost that you're playing and the gauge to do it. You are running your and the card that you're attacking with. There's a lot of sort of compounding resource cost with that kind of line of play. That makes
Yeah, so
sense.
you sort of need to be careful about how much you're spending because Chipp. I think Chipp feels this more than Millia does because Chipp's powers are even lower than
Right.
Millia's. But in general, you need to be careful about the number of times you have to hit the opponent, especially if they're a character who has a bunch of incidental armor, where
Right.
they might just tank you
You
and you
you
sort
just
of run out of your
you
good
just
cards.
bonk off of them for 3 damage and you're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, because your ignore armor is also on Lust Shaker, so if you want to hit hard, it kind of has to be with that moon.
Right, and it's going to be one side or the other of this card. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we talk counterplay, and how to stop her. Although we did sort of just we talked a little bit about that just now. Any considerations on the normals or how you use them? Are you using them largely like every other character would? Do you value certain boosts very highly? I know Badass has come up very often.
So let's see. Slash is pretty good because it's in a range that you're already threatening, but Slash is also kind of hard to enforce because you're already fast, so people will play slows into you a little more often, which
Sure.
means that it's more likely to trade. But advantage is great. The converse to that is that dive and spike are probably a little better than normal. I don't know what just happened to
Goodbye,
that dust.
Dust.
It just got launched across the screen.
See you, bro.
But yeah, dust and dive tend to land maybe a little more often because if they're respecting Bad Moon or Swing Braid, then at range 3, not Swing Braid, not really. If they're respecting, I guess, Bad Moon in particular at range 3,
Right.
or Iron Savior is another one.
Or
Then
Slash. Right.
or Slash.
Like if they are playing those counterattacks into you, you do have your standard options. And like for focus in particular, Swing Braid is range 2. Uh, Dive and Dust cover range 3.
Yeah, I mean Dust does cover range 2 in a pinch.
Oh,
But
sure, right. No, but my I'm sorry. My point is that Swing Braid does not cover range 3.
yeah, Swing Braid it's way worse at 3 than 2 in terms of stunning.
Right, in terms of dealing with sweep in particular, and both these cards do that.
Yeah, cross. I usually play the cross because again, like your options to beat slows are kind of precious, and so having that retreat, especially if a lot of one of the issues that comes up a lot of the time is that if you cross somebody and you beat like a slash or a cross and you stun them and then you retreat a bunch, you then have to take your nice board position and spend that retreating, moving back in
Right.
on characters, and Millia kind of gets around that by having the free movement if she's done. So that'll
Sure.
come up surprisingly often,
Sure.
especially if they wild swing into your cross. Relatedly, I think is the fact that she does like range 4. She has a bunch of cards that do pretty well at 4, and so that's a cross sets that up pretty nicely. But then you have to get back in area
Right.
shift. Area Shift looks a lot worse in a world where Kapel exists. Let's be real.
True. What if area shift just came back to your hand though?
Yeah, it's the main benefit of Area Shift, which is that like kind of nuanced board control and side switch. Kapel's just better for that most of the time,
Right, very true.
and she generates enough gauge that getting 2 cards is just better, or getting it back in a card is probably just better than the gauge.
Better than the gauge. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I don't really Area Shift much. I do cross quite a bit. Grasp, similarly, you don't need Grasp as much in a world where low kick exists. It's just your 7-speed roll
Right.
filler. But Let's Rock is excellent for her. She's good at landing it, and she's good at getting the extra gauge, and now draw 1 is always nice. But Grasp, if it stuns, she can then get a lot of board control, so it's good. It's I've typically played Grasp and Let's Rock sometimes. I maybe should Let's Rock more and play Grasp a little less, but they're both good.
Makes sense.
Ukemi is, I think, kind of important for her because she struggles a bit to deal with raw stats, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yep.
So Ukemi is really good to have for that. Faultless is nice because it's extra guard and she doesn't have much guard, but also she doesn't have much power, so making an attack more consistent isn't that great. You're probably looking at faultlessing a slash or something.
Yeah.
If you can,
I mean, it seems like a lot of her cards also just kind of win when they're played at their correct ranges. So you might be using Faultless in order to shore up something that is you're slightly out of position for.
but the problem with that is that if you're doing like faultless cancel strike, then you want to be winning by enough to justify your investment, and
True.
usually you don't. And usually you don't. And
Right.
if you're just playing faultless, then okay, like maybe they strike into you and you're a little better, but that's a resource math choice. If they don't strike into you, then great. You key charged with a bit of extra effort, and that's
Right.
nice. Getting free gauge is nice. So Spike and Faultless are both pretty good. I think Spike is probably a little better because she has so many tools to enforce that, but because she has so many tools to enforce that, they might just be incentivized to play around it kind of accidentally.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, it's fine if you change cards it or use it to do something else, you're not going to be too sad, but it's not like it's bad. When Spike wins really hard. So,
Right.
your cards tend to be kind of committal. So if you think they're going to block and you don't want to throw a bad moon into it, or you don't have bad moon, like spike that block. You do great if you spike that block.
Yep, that makes
So
sense.
yeah, sweep. I was talking. You lack defense. You want hand pressure. You want guard. You want badass. Like this card is really good
It's
and on both its sides.
everything you'd ever want in a card, but also everything you'd ever want in a
Yeah,
boost.
yeah. Like you're gonna really want this card in general, and you'll probably play it pretty consistently.
Right. Both sides of it.
Focus. Yeah. Focus is good because it gives you cards and it gives you defense. So it's hard to argue with focus. Scramble's kind of awkward because you don't really do the kind of mix-ups where you're going to play a really, really, really high power card and make them have the right answer, or like delete an EX. Because usually Scramble's really good if you have a good setup that has a really high payout and you're willing to spend the extra resources to make it so it's much more likely to hit.
Right.
And your setups mostly don't have that much payout.
Right, yeah. You're winning combat fairly consistently for relatively low damage value, maybe some good economic value.
But also relatively low investment, right? Like you just
Right.
to win a combat with Millia, you just play the right card. You don't throw a scramble down. Like you have 5 cancelable boosts that help you win combat if you
Right.
want that on your character special card or character unique cards alone.
Right.
And so you're more likely to try and win a combat by playing a boost that gives you plus a stat instead of scrambling.
Yeah, that makes
It just
sense.
is much more controllable. So yeah, I don't love scramble with her. Obviously, if you need to kill the opponent, scramble is pretty good. If you want to beat a block, you could scramble, or you could bad moon, like block at your own risk. Bad moon is a card.
Yep, it's true, it is.
So
I've seen it.
yeah, it's a range 1 block crush. So
So have
good luck.
fun.
Um, yeah, I don't love scramble on her. I think she kind of exemplifies the things that are not great about scramble.
Right.
And honestly, like she would probably want reading way more than scramble.
Yeah,
just
sure.
because of the way her kit works.
Yep.
Block is good, gives you gauge. You can't really afford to spend the force too much, so be careful about that. But also, you're definitely stronger on offense than defense, and especially if plus speed is in the mix. So block is great at dealing with setups. The poor man's tech is real.
Yep, definitely.
So yeah, block is good. I'm not sad discarding it, but I'm also likely to play it if I think it's the right choice, or if because you often just kind of have to eat the opponent's setups as Millia. That's just
Right.
the way you work. So
Right.
block is a good way to do that. Also, you tend to generate a bunch of floating gauge, so like playing block and spending a gauge to get 4 armor and then put it in gauge is pretty
Yeah,
nice.
your 4 armor's cool. Going gauge neutral is fine.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Parry is really good. If you need a parry, then hell yeah, just parry something.
Right.
It's similarly, it's just like block, right? It's not a thing that you really want to do, but if it diffuses the setup, it's a good use of your card.
Right.
And if you happen to get some gauge in the process on the block side, go for it. But you also are taking on more risks if you do.
Yep. That all makes
So yeah,
sense.
that's kind of how she runs down the normals. She likes all of them. They're all pretty nice. They all do stuff. In general, they're useful. So play them, appreciate them, use them for whacking the opponent. I guess I didn't talk about Slash, the boost. Dash is actually really good with her because she needs to set up specific ranges a lot of the time, and Dash is a great way to do that. I tend to use Dash more if I am running in from like range 5 or 6 because something went wrong, than like doing the range 1 dash forward to 3 and
The
then
3,
go back
sure.
in.
Yeah.
And obviously dashing from 2 to 2 is not as useful because you're just switching sides, and
And
I don't
and you
know,
have
Capel.
you have a boost for this.
Yeah, Capel is sort of obsoletes that specific use of dash. But
Right.
honestly, if it's between if I need to move in and it's a choice of like spending a Capel or spending a dash, I'm spending the dash
Sure.
almost always,
Yeah,
unless I have a boost that really synergizes with Slash, and then I want to play the Slash afterwards.
you really really want to side switch with this.
And I think I just value Tandem Top more than I value Slash on her.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay.
But
Cool.
Slash is good, so it gives her what she wants, which is again more hand pressure, on curve attacks, and her boosts, especially if you throw a badass or if you throw a Writhe in Pain or you throw a Lust Shaker on it, it's pretty scary.
Yep. Makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, Slash is a strong normal all the time. The fact that the fact that you value Tandem Top more than Slash says more about Tandem Top, I think, than it says about
Yeah,
Slash.
this is not a reflection of Slash being bad. Slash is in
Right.
fact very good.
It's
It's just
very very
Tandem Top
strong.
is
Tandem Top
excellent.
is crazy. That makes sense. Okay.
And honestly, that thinking about that more, like maybe it does make more sense to value Slash because Slash also kind of has draw 2 attached. It's
Oh
really
sure.
the extra flexible range and slightly better boost, and also the advance or retreat that makes Tandem Top come out ahead instead of
It's
being
it's
on curve and getting advantage.
it's really just all the other awesome things about Tandem Top
Yeah,
that
basically.
you're right. That makes sense. All right, so that's every card in your kit. That's everything we got. Any other kind of strategic notes before we talk counterplay and wrap things up?
Well, I think those are actually really tied tightly together. So the thing about Millia, right, is that Millia has her cards are just a little better, or occasionally noticeably better than average, but it's hard for her to like really push that. So cards, some characters like that will tend to have like easy access to +1 power, for example. If you
Right,
look at Giovanna and Ino, some characters will have easy access to like some weird setup boost or setup situations, and some characters will like have other trade-offs. Millia doesn't really have that trade-off, but she also doesn't have access to ways to like really push her cards over the
right.
top.
Like no like ridiculous upside, just good a lot.
Yeah. And the good tends to be like consistent and hard to counteract, but it's usually not good as in it's going to win super hard. That's why Lust Shaker is so important, because it's one of your only ways to like chunk somebody for 6 or 8.
Right,
If you don't have Lust Shaker, you're probably just not doing that unless you hit him with maybe a sweep.
right,
So that's one of her big weaknesses. If you can throw boosts down, she tends to struggle a bit dealing with that. And if she's playing that more defensive play where she's throwing boosts down and kind of letting you set up, if she throws +1 speed and you do +1 speed strike, she's not super thrilled about that. Especially if you're not at a range where she can threaten Swing Braid or Bad Moon. He's also a little mix-up sensitive, so if you have a good mix-up of your own, or if your cards are also pretty good at that specific range, then she's going to have to commit even more to cover them, and that's pretty rough for her. Because what it all comes down to in the end is your economy is sort of slow and steady, but it's not really, you're not that great at spending cards. You know, your EXs are good, but your EXs are not great because generally your cards are so precious and they don't actually hit that hard even with the EX. They already have the speed.
Sure.
So giving them the extra power is fine, I guess. Like making Bad Moon 5 power instead of 4 is nice, but it's not worth 2 Bad Moons.
Right.
Making Tandem Top worth, like, Tandem Top might actually use the speed, so it's a fine EX, but then you're spending extra cards and not getting as much back.
Right.
Swing Braid, again, like EX Swing Braid is super hard to deal with, but you just spent 2 Swing Braids. So
Right.
that's a real commitment for her. And what that means is that if you can pressure her hand, if you can make it so that she has to commit more by either adding plus speed, or if you can throw plus guard, for example, you have faultless defense or similar guard boosts, she does struggle with that. Similarly, if you can just make it harder for her to stun, just if you're smart about throwing your slows, Swing Braid and Dust are her only really good ways to stun a relatively guardy attack. If you have like 4 or 5 guard. So that does mean that she's just not getting your card draw, and if she's not getting your card draw, she has to play slower. And if she's playing slower, you have more room to set up and move and do what you do.
So even though this is not an overwhelmingly powerful part of her character, denying it actually messes her up pretty bad.
Yeah, it's really the fact, like, denying it. If you deny it, you have also generally denied her cards because she's like, maybe she traded down or she
Sure,
didn't stun you.
because she's not doing that much damage. So when she wins pretty hard. When she trades even, or when she trades at all, she's probably losing.
Yeah, and notably, even though she's mobile, she's, as you mentioned earlier, she's not very evasive.
Right.
So Bad Moon can move, has a choice of 1 or 2, but you're probably going to choose the one that hits.
That hits,
right?
of course. Right.
Tandem
Top's
Braid.
got
Tandem
dodge
Top
on
has
it.
great evasion, and it's your only evasion, really.
Right.
Septim Bosses has a push or pull 1. And you have the push or pull. You have some evasion on your boosts, so Turbo Fall and
Turbo
Writhe in
Fall.
Pain
Sure.
have a little bit, and Lost Shaker also. So if you're trying to not trade, hit the opponent and not trade, you probably are playing a boost, which means that you've committed a boost and a gauge, most likely.
Right.
So if you're not stunning and you just spent 3 cards, sure, you did 3 or 4 damage, but 3 cards for 4 damage.
Yeah, that's not a good return on investment.
If the opponent can strike back into that in some good way, is pretty sad.
Yep.
So that's really her biggest weakness, is if you can choose how to call out her cards. Like, yeah, she'll probably win maybe 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 strikes, but you just need to hit her harder than she hits. That she hits you, with the assumption that you got to make up that red life deficit from that you just took from eating the Swing Braids.
And she's going to be investing in order to, going back to what you were talking about earlier. She could make it maybe not 100% of strikes, but she can make it more strikes than 3 out of 5. But that requires an investment that she can't afford.
Yeah, and again, like, if she can put her ultras down to start, those boosts are kind of her main strike winners, right? And Sunbeam himself is a great strike winner. Writhe in Pain is just consistently nice. Lost Shaker is the big one, and like Bad Moon is basically an ultra. It's very high value, and you want to use it at just the right time. So those 3 boosts, I think, are her biggest ones, and the 2 ultras, you're not spending a Bad Moon, but you are spending 2 force.
2 force.
It's an ultra.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty major consideration. So that's the biggest thing. It's you try and deny her stuns, you try and counterattack her, and if you call the mix-up and she wins the mix-up a little bit more often than you do, but you still kind of are hanging in there, that's not great for her. She's going to run into problems with her hand size pretty quickly.
Okay.
And so that's what you have to do. Similarly, if you are a character like Leo, for example, who can throw advantage chains or throw very high aggression numbers into her, she also struggles with that, especially if you have plus stats. Because
which Leo does frequently.
Yeah, because her defense is not guard, it is +1 speed, right? Bad
Right.
Moon is 1 above curve, Swing Braid is 1 above curve, or ignore guard below curve, Septem is 1 above curve. Iron Savior has guard, but it's only 5. If you have plus power, that thing gets crushed pretty reliably, and
Sure.
same with the 4 on Tandem Top. So if you have any like degree of plus stats, her defenses start looking kind of fragile.
Right. And if you are pressuring her resources successfully, uh, those those resources are going to be spent uh, getting rid of the few defensive options that she does have. Now she's almost maybe not defenseless on defense, but pretty close.
Yeah. The other
Oh,
big thing is that when I say like above curve, having +1 speed above curve is great if you're at the right range, right? Bad Moon at
totally.
range 3 is much better than Bad Moon at range 1 or 2.
Right.
And so that's the other way to kind of filter out her defenses. If you're at range 1, for example, and you throw a sweep, she's got Swing Braid, I guess. She's got Winger, I guess.
Right.
You know,
But
you're those are losing to
you're
other stuff.
you are if you are initiating into her at that range, you are accepting the risk of that mix up because you have actually shot off quite a bit of her other stuff.
Yeah, and maybe you're accepting the risk of that mix up because you're like fine with seeing those cards go down, or you have
Sure.
more sweep likes in your kit, or something like that.
Sure.
If you're not a season 7 character, she actually kind of has a bad time with defend the spike boost,
Yep.
because that +1 armor means that focus covers Swing Braid, and the it's because defend is +1 armor +3 guard,
Yeah.
so it happens to make focus cover Swing Braid, and also gives her it just gives you a bunch of like annoying defensive stats, and the 1 armor is a pretty significant chunk of how much she wins the strike by usually.
That's a really good point. That's a third of a swing braid.
So it makes a lot of her cards do less, and she's kind of hard to spike because she's fast. So just play
Might as well
defend.
just drop
It's good
defend
into
on it.
her.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. Faultless defense not as good because
No
she
armor.
strikes a bunch, but also, if she's striking into your guard, that filters a lot of her mix up. So,
True. Yeah, and you're doing something to deny her character ability. That all makes
yep.
sense.
So if you have boosts that are in that boat where you can kind of filter out her mix up and make it harder for her to really take advantage of her stats, then that is also pretty annoying for her.
Got it.
So none of this is insurmountable, right? She's not a character who's kind of fragile or has a game plan that suffers. But if that's sort of how the opponent is playing, she will usually be slower paced, boosting more, trying to play more consistent strikes, trying to leverage more reliable wins, which is in some ways less scary until your resources go down, and then she can start trying to mix you up.
Right. And so by making her play that game, now you have to beat her at that game. Like and
Yeah,
if her tempo is sorry, if her tempo is her advantage, um then making her slow down, even if she can compete when she's slowed down, is putting you more on even footing.
yeah, and so the thing that happens when you're more on even footing is the fact that her cards tend to be a little bit more situational, and she does really like initiating unless you are at the specific ranges or you're throwing down boosts. And also her economy struggles a bit when she's just competing because her power numbers are just not that good.
Right.
And you have to hit them a bunch to actually win.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah, so that's really her weakness. You sort of take away her strengths by playing more carefully, trying to mitigate them, trying to reduce the mix-ups, making her commit more to strikes and not stun. And then once that's down, you start playing a more fair game where her lack of power really shines,
Got
or
it.
shines in your favor. It hurts for her.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Well, cool. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
Yeah. So I think that the other thing we tend to talk about is sort of similar characters.
Yes, please.
And so yeah, the obvious ones are the speedsters. I think we mentioned Noelle a couple times.
Yes.
Where so Noelle's got a lot of that same strategy of your cards are a little awkward, but they're pretty situational. So go and get
Uh,
your
Going
exceed mode is +1 speed and advantage. So
advantage.
you've
Your
got,
exceed mode is constant access to subhuman self.
yeah, basically for what is it, three turns, 4 turns? I think
Yeah,
it's 3 turns.
it's a 4 gauge exceed, so it's 3.
So Happy Chaos,
Hmm.
again, like plus power advantage chains, kind of awkward on defense, kind of specific ranges, but also very good at spending gauge. And not great at buffing. Like his cards are kind of iffy and tends to just make use of the fact that when his cards are good, they're really
They're
good.
really good, right?
Similarly, Giovanna, again, has good above curve options that are a little bit situational, good on curve threat, and tends to kind of try and crush you with a resource advantage and tempo more than anything else.
Right.
And Ram does the same thing, but with range instead of power, where she's getting, she's kind of trying to get those sort of cheeky stuns and pay resources to win strikes clean. If you like the mix-up side, Gold Lewis is less fast and again very tempo heavy. Hit draw 2 is kind of similar to stun draw 1. It's more stats, but he doesn't get the card quality that Millia gets in the process. His cards are much higher power but much lower reliability.
Right.
So those are like season 7 ers. Season 6 got some interesting ones. I think Nanase has a little bit of those shenanigans, where she's got sort of advantage chain shenanigans and a bunch of weird situational cards that she can leverage pretty effectively.
Okay.
Yuzuriha also a little bit. And then who else? Jin, another hand pressure, sort of relatively tempo-oriented character. Bang to a lesser extent. So yeah, there's a lot of this archetype of sort of, you're usually on the quicker side, your boosts tend to be less stat focused and more sort of neutral situational. Lychee is
Oh
another
yeah,
really big
yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah.
obviously.
I feel like Lychee actually fits very well.
Yeah, so like Lychee doesn't really have stats. Her only stat boost is a boost that's very similar to Lust Shaker, I think.
Oh yeah, on Tsubame Gaishi.
Three
Yeah, yeah,
three
yeah,
dragons, I think it
yeah, yeah, yeah. Three
is.
dragons. Yep.
And so, that's, but Lychee, her cards are really good if they're set up right. If you have the staff to take advantage, you have advantage chains. You basically get to set up these little mini combos and then just go pummel them, because if they start getting stats and striking into you, you cry a little.
Yep.
Your one, I guess 1-inch punch or your lunge punch is kind of the same as Iron Savior or glued to Bad Moon in some ways. It's
Oh
like Iron
yeah.
Savior, but like
Unarmed lunge. Yeah, definitely. I can
on
see
lunge,
that.
yeah, a little less reliable, a little more value, and has the ignore guard part of it.
Right.
Lychee's boosts, I think, are worse than Millia's, because Lychee's boosts tend to be a lot more do a
They're
thing and then strike focused.
they're more about like controlling the staff, right? And this is more
Yeah,
neutral play and a little bit of
and
stats at least.
yeah. But again, when your cards are already good, a little bit of stats is pretty important.
Sure.
So that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, so there's a lot of characters that kind of have some DNA shared with, but I think those are kind of the really big summary. So like looking at the later seasons, like we said, it was Noelle and Lychee, and to a lesser extent Bang, Nanase, uh, Yuzu, and maybe Byakuya have a bit of that.
Okay.
And then in season 7, would say definitely Giovanna, Ram to a lesser extent, Happy Chaos. Maybe Ino has a bit of that. Chipp, if you like being fast, but he's much more defensive, or he's much more like safe in that his cards are much more flexible,
Right.
and he tends to try and be really super evasive and not as much just crush your stuff. And then Gold Lewis, who again, not as reliable, but much
Who is
higher reward.
the mix up guy, right?
Yeah, much higher reward. So, yeah, I think that pretty much runs it through.
Cool.
She's definitely not like a boss character archetype, but she kind of has that, a little bit of that, like, your cards are really scary, but you need to be dealt with in certain ways, and the way that you deal with her is really working hard to mitigate her advantages and then just slugging her out.
Right, and then just hitting her really hard, right?
Yeah, because she's not that evasive. If it's not Tandem Top, she's got cross.
She's probably getting hit, right? So if you like Millia, or if you like any of those characters, there might be some commonality there. You can find a kindred spirit in her somewhere, or if you're already a fan, maybe try out somebody like Lychee. Yeah, that might be it then, Andarel. How do we do? I feel like I mean I've learned a ton. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap it up?
No, I think we're good. So hope you enjoy Amelia. I know people are pretty positive on her. I think she's a good character. She's relatively straightforward because her cards are good. So if you're looking to sort of just get a feel for a character who you don't really have to feel too bad about being like, this character is super taxing to play.
Right.
She's not that. Like, she plays good cards. If you want to sort of turn your brain off and play mix-ups, you can, though I don't think your win rate will necessarily be helped by that.
Right, right.
But she's a good introduction to sort of that like set play style and really high pressure style of Exceed, because she's a good tempo character, and she makes that work.
Right. And it's like you said, I mean, at the top of the lesson, what you said was that she was very tactical. There's nothing incredibly complicated about her strategy, but finding those moments to find ways to use her cards is kind of where the skill is going to be. So you
Yeah.
can get better at that aspect of Exceed by playing her, maybe.
The biggest strategic thing about her is that, she only has her cards are good and she only has 2 copies of each, and
Right.
her opponent's defenses are pretty good and they only have 2 copies of each
Right.
usually.
Maintaining your mix-ups in the face of what your opponent is throwing out is that's Exceed sometimes. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that
And
she is going to test you on.
yeah, and she really stresses that, because if the opponent plays the wrong cards, then and you play the right cards, even if it was not entirely intentional,
Right.
you can get these really, really silly situations where you're allowed to just kind of wail on them for a turn or 3, and that could be the game.
Yeah, and now you've probably just won.
Yep.
Gotcha. Well, Andarel, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time here. This was awesome. As always, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yep. Thanks for having me, and thanks for chatting.
Of course. No, it's always fun. And folks at home, I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a little bit something about Millia. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Have a good one.